Welcome to ALN Thursday at 3. My name is Mike Bordenaro. I'm the Executive Director of the Asset Leadership Network, and today we are going to be talking about the ALN Cities and Places Asset Leadership Board. We have Jim Dieter with us and our co-chairs, Claude Tankersley, who is the Director of Operations for City of St. Petersburg, will be joining us, as will Jennifer Mims, the Jacobs patron member. So thank you to Jacobs and our patron members, to our platinum member, Onuma Inc., to our organizational members, and to all of our supporters. And if you're interested in becoming a member, please reach out. We set up custom benefit packages for you, and it's a little plug for the Cities and Places Asset Leadership Board. May 23rd is going to be having another more detailed event with more people. So we came up with the concept of having ALN industry asset leadership boards as a way of delivering our single message of use a structured approach to asset management to a number of different industries. And cities are a big part of our US government and every government. And people say more gets done at the city level than on the state or federal level. That's where people are touching people and interacting with people. So we're very happy that this is up and running. And so the idea is to be able to provide case studies and examples in the terms and languages of the people in the different industry. Jim, can you give us a perspective from consultants about the importance of cities and places, local governments?
One of the amazing developments over the last 10 years since ISO 55,000 documents were released is that asset management has gone from something only practitioners knew about to being widely understood as the way that organizations are thinking about and managing assets of various types, tangible and intangible, in our organization. So there was initially some pockets around energy and the U.S. government, which was reflected in a lot of our ALN programming as we went along. But now the amazing growth is taking place in cities, counties, states, municipalities around the country in asset management. If you have subscribed to a service that talks about opportunities and with government organizations, and just look at asset management, there's a huge diversity of what people think that means, or specifically where they're starting, but just an amazingly broad array of people working, not just the big cities like New York City and Washington, D.C. that we've talked about at great length, but much smaller cities and even some pretty big cities like St. Petersburg. But Claude, welcome. It's great to have you on Thursday at 3 here today.
Thank you.
So we usually start, today might have a little different format, but we like to ask people how they got involved in asset management. You have a less than 5 minute answer to that question?
A less than 5 minute? Yes. We had a crisis. That's my answer. And frankly, I am in the position I'm in because the city had a crisis and my predecessor was fired because of the crisis. And then I was brought in to take over the managing of the crisis. And so that's what got us into asset management. It was one of those aha moments that this crisis was precipitated by the fact that our facilities, out of sight, out of mind, built, designed 50, 60, 100 years ago. Nobody could even remember when they were built, and everybody just was like, oh yeah, we've been working on that forever. And we really didn't understand the condition of our assets until they failed.
So
But
what,
you had a little bit of preparation through your career, right?
Yes.
You're an engineer, you kind of know how things work. You've
Yes.
worked in cities before, so it wasn't that you were thrust into the position, were you?
No, I spent the first half of my career as a consulting engineer doing consulting design work for federal, state, and local governments on everything infrastructure, from water systems, sewer systems, roadway systems, facilities, buildings, landfills. And so I had that experience as a consultant to asset owners for the first part of my career. And then I changed sides. I went to work for a much smaller city called Bradenton, Florida, has about 50,000 people, worked for them for just under a decade. And then the crisis happened here in St. Pete and was brought over to St. Pete.
And what is the population in St. Pete?
St. Pete's population is around 260,000. So we're the 5th largest city in the state of Florida.
Okay. So I'm sorry, Jim, I cut you off.
that's all right. Mike can always take the ball and run with it, you know that.
But one of the things I discovered was so I realized we had an acute crisis and we had a chronic issue that we had to address. And so the patient was dying on the table and we had to stop the bleeding immediately. So we focused on that. But in that process, I started asking the staff, well, give me a master plan for this system. Give me a master plan for this system. When was the last time this system was evaluated? When was the last time this system had a condition assessment done of it? And I found we didn't have any. We didn't have any master plans, or if we did, the master plan was like 30 or 40 years old and nobody even remembered where it was. And so we realized that we didn't even know how many assets we own, much less the condition of them. And so that's what started the process of the initial crisis was in sewer. It was in sewage, but then we started realizing that all of our systems, roadways, bridges, everything was in the same condition, that we didn't even know what we owned. Sometimes we literally found a bridge that we owned that we had completely forgotten that we'd owned this bridge. And
So can I put you at rest?
Yes.
To say that is not uncommon. Actually, it would be uncommon if a large owner, like an owner that has 250,000 people, actually knew all of their assets. We are not at that stage in the United States. So what I said wasn't news to you. You're aware that most organizations don't know what assets they have.
Yes. Yes. And so that part of my journey was once we got the immediate crisis taken care of and we were no longer bleeding sewage into the Tampa Bay, which was generating global. We had people calling us from India and Germany saying, "Oh, you're ruining Tampa Bay." So once we got that fixed and we started being able to look at all of our facilities, all of our assets within the city of St. Petersburg, that's when we started realizing that we really didn't know what we had. So I started reaching out to the other large cities in the state of Florida: Orlando, Tampa, Jacksonville, Miami. And in talking to each of them, none of them really had any citywide approach to understanding, assessing, doing risk analysis on all of their assets. Each city, it might have a department that does a good job of it, but as a city, none of the cities had any experience. So I had to start going outside of Florida. And heck, me in my own research, I actually ended up going to Canada and Australia to find resources online that I could find on my own that helped me understand what perhaps other government agencies have done to try to address this issue.
That's good. Well, Jennifer was finally able to overcome the competing Zoom Teams syndrome. I'm glad it's not just me that has that problem. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I was listening. I think I've heard Claude tell that Tampa Bay story at least 3 times, maybe like 5. And I always am just like, it's always just interesting, like just as a, citizen living in, we all know, the bowels of asset management because we're on this call, right? But when you don't, you just, so everything is related to asset management, right? And people, it's one of those things that people don't think about when things are going really well, right? When you have predictable budgets, when you have reliable infrastructure, when you have a happy customer and client base, things are just running as they should. People don't really start to think about asset management until infrastructure is crumbling, or there's a leak into, a beautiful tourist area, or if your capital budget is so unpredictable because you don't know what you have and what you own. I think it was Arthur put a note in the chat saying like his city didn't even know that they own the streets, and that's just fascinating, but it is oftentimes the most basic place where organizations start is like, what do I own and what condition is it in, right? Just the very basics. And, as a consultant, we always try to counsel our clients, don't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just collecting data that's going to immediately go stale, right? You go out, you do a condition assessment. Now you know what you own, but unless you have a broader system that information is feeding in and going to be kept live and utilized and sort of integrate into all these things that Claude was talking about, thinking about risk and capital investment and all that, it's sort of just I won't say it's money thrown out the window, but it's money that's spent that you're not able to leverage long-term because it immediately goes stale unless there's a broader programmatic kind of system in place that the organization's really pursuing, like they are in St. Pete. So it's awesome. It's exciting to be working with Claude, and he's a very humble guy, but the mayor called him in personally and was like, help. So he's he's there. And you guys are at the very early phases of your journey. So I know I'm super excited about launching this board in conjunction with Jim and Mike and the Asset Leadership Network, because like Claude said, so many cities are struggling with common problems and embarking on the journey for one reason or another. But there's not really that go-to place for cities and municipalities and counties to come together to just share and connect and best practices and those type of things. So we're really hoping that this ALN board creates that environment for that best practice sharing and connections and those type of things.
When Claude was talking about reaching out to other cities in Florida and then beyond, and having had an opportunity to go down and meet Claude and some of the other folks in St. Pete, it's when you put it in the context of, well, it's not just a logical thing to do, but when you're telling your management about what you're working on, just like the first question is, so what are other people doing? And if there's a rationale for an asset leadership board, it's to answer that question. I think is kind of the core idea, to share ideas, share successes, share failures, share starting points, as Claude did. It's unfortunately all too common that the starting point is a failure rather than an opportunity. But I think one of the best things about St. Pete is how they've turned that negative occurrence to a real positive opportunity. One of the things I'm really impressed about St. Pete is some people say, well, let's do the low hanging fruit. We'll do one department or we'll do one type of asset. But St. Pete really went into it in a broad way. Like, can you talk about, how you got to that decision and what do you think about it, some way into your journey?
So we are still on that journey, and sometimes I feel like we're still at the very beginning of the journey, even though we've been really at it for now 7 years. But as the public works administrator, I had a good deal of authority and expertise over the public works assets, but the city owns a significant amount of assets that are not within public works. Here in St. Pete, all of our parks facilities are not part of Public Works. We have a lot of sports stadiums that are not part of Public Works. We have a lot of municipal buildings, libraries. St. Pete has its own library system. In Florida, it's usually the counties that run the libraries, but here in St. Pete, we have our own library system. So we had all these assets that in the other administrations that were basically just we're as ignorant about as we were in Public Works. But the other administrations were fearful that if we dove deeply into their data to determine what was going on with them, that it would reveal that they had also not been taking care of their facilities appropriately. So there was a lot of pushback, and there continues to be a lot of pushback of, why do we even want to do this? And why don't we just wait for another crisis? Because when we had this crisis, it was horrible. But it gave, because there's several comments in the chat here about politics, that crisis forced the politics and forced the politicians to do something about it. But the longer we get away from that crisis from 2016, the more the politicians forget. And so trying to get the rest of the team on board with the city was a real challenge. It took me several years to actually convince the mayor at the time to champion asset management as a citywide initiative. And I was the only administrator. He has 5 administrators. I was the only administrator of the 5 that supported it. The other 4 were dead against it. But the mayor decided that he was going to be strong enough and stand up and say, no, we're going to do it. When that mayor was termed out of office and we got a brand new mayor, guess what? Now I had to start the process all over again, educating the new mayor. And then the other administrators were like, oh, you know, it's going to cost a lot of money. We're going to find a lot of things we don't want the public to know. And so there's been a whole lot of resistance. So we've been making progress, but it's been very slow. Things that we thought that we could get done in 1 or 2 years is taking us 3 years. But nevertheless, we're still making progress. We have an asset management policy, an executive asset management policy that was signed by the previous mayor that is still in effect and will continue to be in effect until another mayor decides they want to scrap it. And so let's hope that doesn't happen. And so from that, our next step was to take that asset management policy and start working on a strategic asset management plan, a SAM. And so that is the process we are starting to wrap up now. We're getting close to having that SAMP completed. And so once we do that, then we hope to take the next steps. One of the recommendations that I had been making, and that came out of our SAMP also, is that we actually have an Office of Asset Management, and that it needs to be associated with the city administrator, not associated with the Public Works administrator, not just made into some manager over there that nobody will pay attention to, but it will have the weight of the executive management of the city behind it. And we have finally gotten agreement from the citywide administration that we're going to move in that direction. So I anticipate we'll be hiring our first asset management officer for the city within the next 12 months or so.
12 months, I was hoping to be sooner.
Hey, it's government. Government is slow.
Oh my goodness.
There's so many-
And so
Yeah.
frankly, so one of the reasons why I say that Jennifer, though, is that so one of the first things we did is we started going around within our organization and trying to identify people who are already at the city to see, is this something that you would be interested in doing and pursuing? And so far we're finding a lot of people who think it would be wonderful, but they're frightened of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're not able to find somebody internally that we can, close into that position, then we're going to have to start looking outside of the city and advertising, doing national search and all that kind of stuff. So that's why I'm always conservative when it comes to time.
You are. I
Well,
know.
that'd be rough duty to be working in the St. Pete, huh?
But I really like the approach though. Claude, that you're taking, because what I found, so I've been with Jacobs for 9 years, and almost all my clients that I've worked with, I would say 90+% have been government agencies of, whether it's ports or airports or cities, municipalities. I've worked with a couple private sector, so I'm very used to this slowness and what Claude is talking about, like the political, I mean, some of you have put in a chat, like the political nature of asset management, because it really is a slow burn. And you have these like politicians or these leaders that want to see these immediate return on investments. Like if I'm going to do these things, whatever, implement an enterprise asset management system, or even do a condition assessment, basic stuff, like what is the return on investment, right? Like that's always like at the forefront. So it is, I think for, any organization, asset management's always a challenge. So you do need that right personality. And I love the approach of looking within to find that person that's really passionate about it, because it has to be somebody that really wants to take on change, that has the vision and is almost up for the good fight, because people don't fall in line behind asset management. So if there's that strong person from within, and they can kind of grow and develop and get the connections and relationships internally, it'll make that path smoother. So yes, I wish you luck. I'm excited that you guys are moving in that direction for sure.
I appreciate, Marty, I appreciate the reference to the ASTM E3210. I'm not familiar with it, so thank you for that reference. I'll definitely be looking into it. And to clarify, yes, this Office of Asset Management will be separate from Public Works, because the intention is that we will look at all of the city assets, not just the Public Works assets.
When I was most recently down there in the spring, whenever, how long ago was it? But there was still in recent memory the hurricane that had hit the Gulf Coast. And, fortunately for the people in St. Pete, it didn't hit there, it hit somewhere else. But you start to think about the aftermath of a hurricane and needing to know what you have and how everything is connected to everything else. And it's like, that's a time that an asset management system, can really show its worth. And if you don't have one, like in Art's case, you don't even know you have that road. much less go to fix it. So I want to make sure we mention that this is a precursor to we're going to have a roundtable, the first sort of major planned event around the Cities and Places Asset Leadership Forum, and it'll be May 23rd. It's a Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon, and we'll have some other folks on to share more stories and to try to start to build this into a peer group of people interested in this topic, whatever angle they're coming from, government employees and consultants, suppliers, other interested people. Mike, we have any other information confirmed on participants in May?
Yes, so Earl Campbell, who is the Assistant Manager and CFO for Denver City and County. Pardon?
Earl Jackson, right?
Earl Jackson. Earl Campbell's a football player from my youth. Sorry.
I was getting excited.
Yeah, like wow.
Earl Jackson. I promoted him to running back. Anyway, he actually has a promotion. Last year at the National Academy of Sciences, he spoke. He was the CFO of Denver Transportation and Infrastructure. Now he's assistant manager and CFO. So I suspect that the executive briefing that we did with Denver last year helped give him traction, and from the CFO position is now having a little bit more control over the system. And it kind of makes sense to have a CFO be driving it. We've seen that with DC government, and our experience with the Government Finance Officers Association shows that also. So Kyle Wedberg, who is a senior manager at the GFOA and is our contact there, will be reporting to us from the GFOA annual conference in Portland, where Claude's CFO will be, and maybe we'll be able to get her to be on with Kyle. And that's on May 23rd. But today we have actually quite a few people who are in city asset management, are in cities. So if anybody who wants to join the panel, this is a discussion program. It's not our typical ALN Thursday at 3 where we'd be ending about now. We want to have more discussion about what can be done in the United States, but around the world also, so that when other people like Claude want to find out what's going on, they don't have to fly to Australia. They don't have to go to Canada. But we do have close relationships with our colleagues in Australia. We do have close relationship with our colleagues in Canada. But we want to build that up in the US so that it's a lot easier to get the information that Claude needed to get started. So just send a note in the chat and I can promote you to panelists if any of you want, have brushed your hair and, or have pants on and all that stuff. Claude, what was it that you were looking for when you went out to these other places? Because basically, I think you're creating a roadmap for what this City and Places Board needs to do. And one of the things is to be ready with information on your starting your asset management journey for your city or local government. And then a policy. So one of the people online here is from Portland, Oregon, and they've got a policy also. So we can start building up public references. Mm-hmm. What were some of the other things you were looking for when you traveled around?
I was, frankly, I felt like somebody graduating from 9th grade and immediately thrust into college and said, hey, sink or swim. I did not know how to even begin to even start developing a citywide asset management program that will become an operational program that'll last long beyond me, long after the person who comes after me. All of our assets last 50 to 100 years. We need to have programs that take that into account and not be set, unfortunately for cities, be set on the 4-year timetable of elections. So I was trying to look to see how that got started, because I recognize that whatever we got started here, I was not going to finish. I'm going to be retiring before this thing is finished. So I want to make sure it's got started off correctly. And so finding examples of, so the first thing we did actually was to create a project charter that I used to demonstrate to the mayor why it was important. And part of that project charter was to go through a cost benefit analysis to put together the business case for doing this. If we're going to spend millions of dollars inventorying our assets, coming up with conditions of the assets and so forth, what is that return on investment that we talk about? And I had to admit in this charter that I could not do a business case analysis because I could not find one. Now, that didn't mean one didn't exist, but in my research, I could not find anywhere online where a municipality in the United States had done a business case analysis demonstrating the need for good asset management. And so those are the kind of things that I was looking for that I could not find, that I hope that we're going to be able to leave to the people who come later on.
Now it gets to, from an ISO perspective, and we're getting ready for the ISO meetings that the US is hosting in Philadelphia after next. In the first go around, when the documents were being developed, and has been all along, great participation from people in Canada that are cities and places people. And we had lots of discussion that helped forge our emphasis in the documents on value. The key question being, so what value do you put on having green space in a park where your kid can play on a swing? So that the definition of value was not specifically tied to the cost of the asset or, some other typical metrics around infrastructure assets, but allowed organizations to find the ways that they thought that was important. I know, my quick story was when I was in St. Pete, sitting in a beautiful restaurant on the waterfront that had just been developed, and looking across a park with public art in it to the waterfront. And it's like, well, there we see asset management, and I'm sure in your organization, all of those assets are in different departments.
Mhm. Mhm.
They were all there, and they all supported each other in that way.
We're
Yeah.
finding we have some assets that we still haven't figured out which department claims it. So it is quite challenging. And if I could, Celia mentioned about going beyond identification to connecting with stakeholders, and that is something that's really important that we've been trying to work on, because we were able to connect this process to the crisis that we had. We were doing a lot of communication to the public, a lot of outreach, a lot of meetings, a lot of charrettes, all kinds of things, talking to the public about what we were doing to solve the crisis, but what we were going to do to prevent the next one. I think we've done a good enough job now that just in general, people know that this is a process that we're working on, and they're expecting to see some results. I think they're hoping that they'll be able to see results sooner than we're able to provide it. But I have been finding when I go out to speak to neighborhood associations or to civic associations or to the Chamber of Commerce, more and more the folks are aware of this, and they're eager to see where it goes next, and they're eager to see some results. And that's the part that scares me, because everything we do every 4 years, we have new elections, and we could get a completely new council, completely new mayor in here who doesn't see the value in it and could squash it. And then we'd be dealing with the public perception that we made promises for something that we didn't deliver on.
Right.
So Jennifer, you see a lot of other cities. Can you share what you see about stakeholder involvement? I would suspect that you want to see a lot of stakeholders when you go to assess or engage with a potential client.
Right. I mean, it really does vary. It really does vary from client to client. We work with a lot of cities' water utility departments. And I think that the water industry as a whole, I would say, tends to be a little bit more mature than some of the other industries that I work with. And therefore, there's much more engagement, and they're sort of farther along on the maturity continuum. But I think for those types of industries that are sort of starting out, and I think cities, like big cities and counties and municipalities that are all departments, not just utilities and water utilities, tend to be early in their starting phase. And so I think that executive leadership is so critical. Often what we see, in this often fails, is when there's somebody within the organization that's very passionate about asset management, and they sort of start on a path, but they're kind of buried within the organization. We have a client that we're working with now, and they don't have that policy in place, or that charter, that sort of mandate. So they're trying to engage stakeholders kind of at their same level, because they're passionate and they see the vision and they're knowledgeable and all this, and they get pushback. Like, why are you inviting me to a 3-hour workshop to assess our maturity? Or, they don't have the clout to engage the stakeholders. So I think having that top-down leadership, even though at St. Pete, it's at risk every 4 years of, how's the political winds gonna blow? It's so critical to get stakeholder engagement, because if you don't have that endorsement, everybody has more work on their plate that they're able to engage with. And some of this work takes a lot of focused time. So if they're being invited to a meeting by one of their peers, that peer gets a lot of pushback. Like, why are you talking with me about processes for onboarding assets? This is not your lane, is what, they tend to get. So It really varies from client to client. And something I wanted to touch on too, that Jim was sort of talking about, as well as, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but Obaid Shah, that put in the chat, is about this R, where it's not always about the monetary return on investment. Really, it's really about the social value, and more, you know, starting to think about assets and infrastructure investment from those civic services, like Obaid said, or just where the investments are made. So looking at it from a much broader lens, or at least having equity be one of the lenses that is used to help make decisions around investments. Mike, I think you mentioned it, that the city of Portland has actually incorporated some of these elements into their policies, and we're seeing this more and more. You know, there's lots of examples out there, like, it's not necessarily a coincidence that we have water infrastructure failing in low income areas. Like, how often have we seen that in, you know, high income? I just don't think I've seen it. You know, we have story after story about assets and infrastructure, like in Seattle, right? And I think maybe I've used this example before. I know I have, I'm not sure on an ALN, but in the low income areas, those trains are up above ground running. There's major safety issues. In the higher income areas, all those trains are underground. They don't stop traffic. They're not a risk to pedestrians, all these things. So as organizations really start to think about asset management and investments more broadly, and the R just not being money, but about services and equity, I think we're going to continue to see a shift in that area. So that's something I'm just very passionate about. I mean, there's so many different spaces in asset management that we can get excited about because there's so much, but the social equity piece, I'm so hopeful that that starts to really influence some of these decisions being made. And I think it will. I think it's starting to.
We have some great video from both Mark Morial, who was the former mayor of New Orleans, brought to us by Marty Rowland, who's on the line, and is now the head of the League of Cities, and or not the League of Cities, the Urban League, excuse me, and Martin O'Malley, who was mayor of Baltimore, governor of Maryland, and presidential candidate, have some really, really good stories and solutions, you know, involving the equity issue and asset management. And both of them presented it as a big part of their successes is finding solutions to that. Because it's, I mean, there are two ways to look at it. It's, well, we pay the most taxes, we should get the best services, or, you know, we need it the most, we should get the most, and at least have to recognize that those positions exist. And the city in general, not just an asset management issue, it's a city issue on how resources are shared.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody put in the chat much earlier on, I don't recall who, but like how political asset management can become. I mean, Claude talked about it from just who's the mayor, but, you know, we take that all up, like who's the president of the United States, you know, I mean, they have different policy issues, right? That what they're gonna do. And, you know, that sets the tone for a lot of what can happen. So yeah, be an interesting space to play in.
Well, I'm taking notes, and this is setting the tone for how the board is going to work going into the future. And a lot of the questions that are coming indicate what we need to create as content for those people who will be looking to us in the future. So if anybody online is interested in specific topics or other issues, please go ahead and put those in there. We can discuss those.
It's a key feature of the ALN that we typically not looking for attendees. I mean, attendees are fine. We're looking for participants, people that engage, you know, can share, ask questions, and you know, share their own successes and issues. It's so I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I love the chat. I mean, just all the issues, like I think it was Obaid again, the hit on climate change. Yes, that's another one that like has a direct tie-in that I think is perfect agenda topic. huge. Something else that's not quite as exciting, you know, equity is huge for me, social equity, and even, you know, climate change and all that. But a big part of asset management, and it's something I'm also personally passionate about, is the data transformation, right? There's so much information out there now on assets, not just what do we have, but all these assets are sending off information about themselves. Am I functioning? What condition am I in? Am I operating the way I need to be? And not to mention that when they're being designed in like 3D models and BIM and all this, and to really be able to capture that information in a meaningful way and leverage it throughout the entire asset life cycle. It's not easily done unless there's like a very thoughtful information management strategy. But that, you know, that's sort of the golden ring, is like, how do we really, you know what information we want to make the best decisions and make sure that we're leveraging it. Because over and over we go design something, we have all this great data, it dies. And then consultants like Jacobs get paid, go collect our data, because we don't know what we own. You know, so if we could just get like this smooth pipeline of really like managing the data as an asset, that's when real efficiencies start to come into play, I think.
You know what I'm finding exciting is that in this process, that it's the younger members of our team that really are embracing this. In part, I think because of climate change, and they recognize that they're probably going to be impacted more by climate change than old farts like me. But also, I think they're just more open to thinking this way. And so I do think we are building a program that will last if we can just keep that momentum going till we get that to that tipping point where we've got enough people interested in it.
Now, we talk about it as systems and, you know, systems viewpoint or systems theory, but, you know, it really doesn't do justice to the concept of everything that's involved in doing this. There's everything involved in just building the process and the structure to do it, but even more so, it just in the result. You know, the value is in the value to the citizens of St. Petersburg, right? You know, is the snow plowed off of their street?
Yeah, that's something we don't have to worry about.
But that reflects what we've been finding. ALN is matured. We're now at our 10-year anniversary is coming up pretty soon. And it appears that all of the tools and processes that are available seem to work just fine. ISO 55000, 1 and 2, and you know, there are things to follow. What is needed, and Jim, I quote this from you all the time, and Jim said that our bridges are not falling down because we don't know how to maintain our bridges. Our bridges are falling down because our political leaders don't marshal the will of the people to do the hard work of maintaining our bridges.
Yes.
And so what is needed is that culture. And Claude, I was so glad to hear that has kind of taken root. If the policy is still in place, then you've got the beginnings of an asset management culture. And then how do we show people the benefits when the Air Force has come on and said they're 15 years into their asset management journey and they've got another 20 years to go? I mean, that's a global organization, but you know, they're far advanced and they're admitting that this is a long journey. So I think what Cecilia is talking about and what Jennifer talks about are some of the immediate returns, the equity, the involvement, the people who are asked their opinion. Holy cow, what a great benefit to a government. And that's one of the things that I like about cities and places, is we're not dealing with the typical return on investment. And so there can be an immediate huge impact by just having that meeting that asks people what they think.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, we have airline clients that we work with. It's not the airplanes, it's the facilities. And they can't get behind what is the value of doing some of these things. Why do we want a predictable capital investment plan for our facilities, our terminals and all that. And it's so fascinating to me because the airline side, the aircraft side of that business, they have asset management down to a T, how much money it's going to save them down to the, you know, 10th of a penny, the safety issues, the risk issues, the reliability, they are doing it. So when you get to private sector, they get this stuff figured out because there are return on investments, there are these safety things. So I just found it really fascinating with our airline customers where this part of the business has it figured out. This part can't get off of, you know, first base because they're saying, well, is it something that really adds value and, you know, and that type of thing. And, you know, I mean, we all have these issues, you know, Jacobs and everywhere we go, St. Pete is like, are we sharing practices amongst our own organization to make sure we're putting our best foot forward? But the airline one's just really fascinating to me. Yeah.
So I'm so glad you brought that up because Jacobs is sponsoring a presentation by Hartsfield Airport for the launch of the Institute of Asset Management Atlanta chapter on May 3rd. So we highly recommend that you go and attend that. We know that Jacobs has done great work with the Atlanta Airlines Terminal Company, and that's, you know, the Hartsfield Airport facilities. And Lindsay Ziegler will be representing the ALN there. So if you're in Atlanta and you're able to go, say hello to Lindsay. And I think that'll be a great opportunity to do some of this cross-pollinating activity. So we appreciate Jacob sponsoring that, even though it's not ours, it's asset management, and we're all for it.
Yeah, thanks for that plug. I forgot. Well, I didn't totally forget, but that's good. And also, I mean, the IAM is also a good forum. So if you're in a city that doesn't have a IAM chapter, I know Portland does, I see Portland on, but I do find that they're useful groups for the same idea, just cross-sharing. So Atlanta's really excited to get theirs launched. But I don't know if there's one in the St. Pete area.
I haven't been able to find it. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Well, there's your opportunity. You can go launch. Yes, you can go launch. And then you didn't miss. So that was one of the ways that you sort of got the ball rolling with St. Pete as well, right? Is a handful of people, I'm not sure how many, went to get some basic training through the IEM program, right? And that kind of got like, you started to build your like little quorum of people and soldiers.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, some of the comments in there are talking about the building relationships, the will of the people. It's got to be a grassroots type thing. And that is what we're seeing within the city of St. Petersburg employee organization, that it really is the most enthusiastic people are the grassroots folks that who probably see not only the benefit to the city, the benefit to the citizens, but also probably career opportunities for themselves as they grow. And so that's really where I see the excitement, and it's really fun. I'm finding that really the elected officials are into it so far. They like it so far because the citizens tell them that they want it. And then the grassroots, you know, worker bee folks are in it. It's that executive folks that are the career executives within the city. They're the ones that are the most reticent, and it frightens them.
Yeah. And, you know, what I've observed is, you know, asset intensive organizations like cities or airports or rail, there's such focus on building of the new shiny things and, you know, ribbon cutting type ceremony, like go build new capital, and like getting people energized about existing, like Jim calls like preservation of existing assets. That's a real thing too. And it's such a tough one because there's not going to be a ribbon to be cut when a, you know, new, you know, vertical transportation system is installed or whatever. And, you know, a lot of the folks where we're trying to get the culture change, they love being in firefighting mode. Something breaks and they get to go fix it and they've saved the day. And so the sort of that reactionary type of thing, that's what they thrive on. So it's like, you know, you have this big capital wave of money and it's kind of saying, okay, this existing stuff is important too. And then you have your boots on the ground people that like things to break so they can go fix them and respond. So and we're like, well, just think about doing this in a predictive way. And you can use technology that'll tell you before it fails. It's like, I don't want to do that. That's not what I, that's not my expertise. It's not what I love to do. So it's like you're kind of fighting all these sort of different cultures from different angles in a way.
One factor we haven't talked about is that I think we're all familiar with, but it bears repeating, is the huge investment overall in infrastructure, and what an amazing percentage of that is in cities and places.
Mhm.
The federal government has some, and have a hand in a lot of it. But a few years ago, Doug Detter, who was one of our speakers, had a number of the around the world. There was $177 trillion worth of government assets at the government level, and that didn't begin to touch the assets at the state or provincial or city level. It's just a stunning amount of investment, and I think we don't often see a big number associated with it unless we have something like that. A hurricane blows in, and all of a sudden, how much money do we need to fix this stuff? Wow.
Does somebody have to die at this intersection before we put up a stop sign or a stoplight? And unfortunately, the answer is yes. And what we're really driving at is we need to change human behavior. And we're just using asset management as the way to get people to focus on what's really important. And if we understand that that's what we're doing, maybe that'll help us create the tools and the content that will allow others to start their journey in their cities, because we've got people from all over in all different industries, but everybody lives in a city or someplace. And we can all take this to our local government. So in addition to creating content for officials in government organizations, we might also want to think about how to encourage the citizen to start demanding this. Well, we get a different angle, because all of us are citizens somewhere.
Yes.
So,
love that. Yes.
well, we're coming to the end. I kind of gave my summary. We can go around and let anybody make any closing marks. Jim, how do you want to do the order for that?
Well, let's start with Claude. He was the first one on. So,
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you guys today. I'll have to admit, certain level, I'm feeling a certain level of imposter syndrome. I'm really feeling intimidated by the folks that I know that are on here who truly have asset management backgrounds. I do not. I don't have an asset management background. I'm an engineer who designed things.
That's asset management right there.
I'm feeling very honored to be here, but also very frightened that at some point you guys are going to realize I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, and that I'm going to need more from you than you can get from me. But I do appreciate y'all allowing me to be here.
when we
Let me just address that before. I'm not going to let that stand. No, Claude, everything you have said shows that you are highly informed about key issues of asset management. And ISO 55001 10.3, the very last item, is continual improvement. So yes, all of us will always be continually improving in our journey. So you're not an imposter. We appreciate your very real world experience, and thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
Jack Kelly, who is, I think, still on the call, when he joined us, he was new to asset management, and he's been an amazing contributor. But after 5 years, he was still saying, well, I'm new to asset management, and we said, you don't get to say that anymore. Jennifer, any thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, maybe just briefly. I think that's so funny, Claude, hearing that imposter syndrome. I mean, to be honest, I sort of feel the same way. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I always sort of like when it's like, oh, can you talk about asset management, or can you go meet this new client? I always get like nervous, like, well, what do I have to offer? I always have that. And I've been doing consulting for 10 years now, and I've been doing asset management for 20. So I still have some of that imposter syndrome. But as you can probably tell, I'm very passionate about it. I believe in asset management, and I'm super excited about this board, because when I do work with clients, or when I was on the client side, there's always that desire, like, well, what are other organizations in this space doing? What, that question is always asked 100% of the time. So this forum is going to provide that opportunity to hear what other cities and places are doing. So I'm super excited and honored to be a part of it. So thanks so much, Jim and Mike, for setting up and facilitating all of this.
Well, thank you.
Thanks to Jacobs. So just a couple quick thoughts is the details, we tend to get very focused on the details. But as we did in this call, if we always remember, it's really about the value delivered. It's really important. And the quote that I always, Mike quoted me before, and I quote Jack Dempsey, who was a long time Jacobs employee. And before that with the Coast Guard, he'd say, it's not about the Coast Guard cutters, it's about pulling the child from the water. And that's, we try to remember that at the ALN, and hopefully we'll make that a part of this asset leadership board of, the real value and outcomes that we're focused on, and the difference we know we can make in organizations, in cities and places around the US.
Well, thank you all. And thank you to our very engaged audience. And before we depart, I just want to once again thank our speakers, Claude Tankersley, Jennifer Mims, and Jim Dieter. And thank our Platinum organizational member, Onuma Inc., which has an activity that keeps on building on the AI activity he did with the Asset Leadership Network. We'll have more about that in the future. Thank you to Jacobs, our patron member, and other patron members, to our organizational members. And next week, just during this call, I found out that Marty Rowland will be our guest editor, but I was not able to grab his picture and put it up here. But Marty is an ALN senior fellow, and he is the guest editor for the American Journal of Economics and Sociology. And he is having an asset management issue as part of his tenure. He's dealing with 4 publications over the course of a year. They're quarterly. And I think that says more about the ALN maturing in our 10th year, that we're going to have our participants write for a journal on asset management. So it's economics and sociology, but he's having an issue on asset management. And then please join Claude and Jennifer and Jim, along with Earl Jackson and Kyle Wedberg and others in a month. And we'll be a little bit more specific in our presentations, but I really enjoyed this conversation. This was a great way to launch the ALN Cities and Places Asset Leadership Board. So thank you all. And thank you back to Kenya. So glad that someone from Kenya is joining us.
Oh, that's awesome. Wow. Thank you again. I'll see
We'll
you
see you
all
all
next
next week.
month. Excellent.
Thanks.